there will be a Q&A session after the input from our speakers. You can ask your questions in the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen. And welcome. So now we are YouTube live. We weren't before. And yeah, welcome everybody. We will be starting in a few minutes. There will be a Q&A after our speakers speak. And you can find the button for the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, where you can ask questions throughout the sessions. And we will try to answer every question you have, but that may not be possible due to time constraints. So if there are any questions left over, we will try to respond to them afterwards. And now, for our very interesting session, I will give over to our moderator, Mohammed.
A very good afternoon and welcome everyone to the session discussing the role of business in promoting the rights of women migrant workers. My name is Mohammed Nasiri and I'm the Regional Director of UN Women in the Asia and the Pacific. We will be together for 1.5 hours and we have a distinguished set of panelists today. Before I introduce the panelists and I start a conversation, I just want to refresh our collective memory on where we stand today when it comes to the situation of migrant workers in the region. It's estimated to have around 62 million migrants from around the world in this part of the world, in the Asia-Pacific region. In Southeast Asia alone, there is a little more than 10 million international migrants. Out of this is around 7 million that migrated to other countries within the region. Among these, about half of them are women. With most of the migrants engaged in labor migration, an important feature and a key driver of the region economic growth and development. For countries of destination, migrant workers help fill gaps in labor markets in the countries of destination by doing jobs that locals usually do not do. For countries of origin, migrant workers send financial remittances, knowledge and skills upon returning to their home countries. The major destination countries within our region are Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. And Thailand is the biggest destination for women migrants in the whole region. The sectors of employment are highly gendered, as we may imagine. And that's a trend that started over 20 years ago. In Southeast Asia, women migrants are often employed in hospitality, domestic work, agriculture, manufacturing, and to a lesser extent in construction. The migration flow in Southeast Asia is particularly influenced by the lack of decent work for women in countries of origin and the increase of the demand of female labor in destination countries. So there is a push and pull factors on both ends. For many women, labor migration is a pathway to reduce poverty and increase social mobility. It offers them opportunities to improve their lives and the lives of their families. Many migrants send significant shares of their income to their families back home. Asia benefits from a very high level of remittances that have reached close to $302 billion in 2018 alone. Around 29% of this inflows to Asia from migrants, host countries within the region. And some 68% of these flows were from the East Asia and Southeast Asia. Another 30% comes from Oceania and South Asia. Proportionately, women contribute more in remittances than men, as we can all expect. Despite the substantial contributions to the region's economic development, unfortunately, many women migrants still are not legally recognized, undervalued, do not have conducive work environment or contexts. Studies reveal that women migrants are more frequently employed in less regulated sectors. They also face various forms of discrimination and violence based on the grounds of both their gender and their migration status. With the emerge of the ongoing pandemic, women migrant workers are now facing more challenges economically and socially. I myself was in Samut Sakhon, a neighboring province to Bangkok last week, and also in Bangkok visiting migrant communities, and the needs are increasing during COVID, but also the challenges are increasing when it comes to economic fragility, but also their own personal and physical safety and mental health and well-being. We have today, as I said, a very distinguished, but also a very diverse panel. We have my friend and comrade, Dana Graeber-Leidig, who is the Chief of Mission of the International Organization for Migration in Thailand. We have Kun Siriwan Romchatong, the Secretary General of Employers Confederation of Thailand, ECOT. We have Kun Natchapatkorn Chotsiri, the President of Pat Cherion Interco Limited in Thailand. And last but not least, we have Ms. Gillen Patlaren, Executive Director of Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau in the Philippines. Before we move into my conversation with the different panel members, let us do a first poll question together. And I would like to ask those who are with us today in the room, in the virtual room, all the participants, which sectors we have here from the business, government, civil society organizations. So as you can see now on your own screens, you will have the poll questions, and it would be excellent if you would answer according to where you come from.
40% voted. Wait a little bit. Got 50, only 2%. 60% have voted.
Show it again. So we're almost at 60% of the respondents, and as we can see, we have around 20% of our participants today are from government, academic and research institutions, around another 20%, 19 point something, from the civil society. So it's good. We have an equal participation list. And then we have around 13% from multinational companies, and less so from the local business associations. We have a good representation from the UN, around 16%, and we have around 10% from the employer organizations. With that, I will turn now to Gillen for my first question. But let me introduce her first for those who do not know her well. Ms. Gillen Patlaren is a feminist, educator, community worker, and has been part of the women's movement for the past 2 decades. She's the executive director of the Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau. The Women's Legal and Human Rights Bureau, formerly Women's Legal Bureau, was established 30 years ago by feminist human rights advocates wanting to effectively address the prejudices suffered by Filipino women before the law in the legal system. Jelen, we see that women migrants bring diversity and contribute greatly to the region's economic and labor market. Let us hear further from you as a civil society representative who work tirelessly to promote the rights of women migrant workers. Why is it important to ensure inclusive growth and gender inclusion in the supply chain? To you, Jelen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Mohammed, for the kind introduction and for introducing my organization, WLB, which is based in the Philippines. If I may just bring you to my first slide. Okay, next slide, please. Can you proceed to the next slide, please? Next slide also. Thank you. Okay. Why is it important to ensure inclusive growth and gender inclusion in the supply chain? We believe as a feminist organization that feminist perspective is important in incorporating into economic development and should be part of the economic agenda. Counting women's contribution to the economy is very important because women always remain invisible, unrecognized, and seen as subordinate or in a subordinate position or others by the economy. And I think the objective of this session is to show why it's important to surface the invisibility of women, particularly in migration work. No? So data is important to show women's role and contribution and making women's issues visible by ensuring that women are included and part of the data sets. So for this particular slide, this was taken from the Mekong Migration Network and was cited in a research written by WLB entitled The Missing Women. It actually captures some of the employment. Where are the women migrant workers in selected Southeast Asian countries? And this was already reiterated earlier by Mohammed, that most women migrant workers are either in the domestic work, agriculture, marine fisheries, and factory work, self-employed, street vending. No? So you can see that women are working in a very diverse work, but most of them are working as either in low-skilled jobs. So in 2018, the World Bank estimates migrant workers, same slide, as contributing both in migrant workers are contributing both in the economy of both the receiving and sending country. In fact, the remittance of migrant workers in 2018 is even equivalent to almost 300 billion. So by just looking at that particular data, it actually captures that women migrant workers are helping to boost the economy of these countries, no, both the receiving and the origin country, no, but their issues remain invisible or treated neutrally through policies or responses. So most women migrant workers in Southeast Asia are working in these industries, but these data that are these particular data only shows the data where women or women migrant workers are the documented ones. No, this does not reflect the undocumented ones. So if I may proceed to my second slide, women face challenges in the supply chains, no, and this must be addressed, or else it's like give the cold shoulder approach to issues of women migrant workers. So number one, the social one of the common problems of women migrant workers is gender stereotyping, no, of women's roles, which usually leads to cheap and flexible sources of labor, equating women's characteristics as equivalent to low and low-paying jobs. there's also this perspective that that women's work is connected to her being a woman. So it's basically an instrumentalist view of women's work. No, women with intricate hands, so they work in the manufacturing companies. Women are more patient, so they become teachers and tutors. Women are caring, so they become caregivers or nurse. So basically, data will show that there is a continuing feminization of migration and even reproductive labor. And yet, in this kind of work, violence continue to happen. It would appear that some of the policies, whether by government or even by both the receiving and the sending countries, would appear that there is minimal intervention when it comes to the sexual violence or violence against women. But you will see that it's very important to show that the socioeconomic cost of sexual violence is enormous, and it's encompassing and immeasurable. But sometimes it's being sidelined and not deemed to be integral part of economic development. Why? Because basically we see that violence against women is not connected to development. And I think this is what we wanted to highlight in this particular session. How violence against women or sexual violence per se, particularly committed against women migrant workers, are important elements and indicators of economic development. If we remain, if this data remain invisible and left unaddressed, it's like saying that women migrant workers' agenda are not important. Second concern is the devaluation of women's work. Women are usually placed at the bottom of the global value chain, and they become usually victims of sexual violence and discrimination. One particular challenge is that most women, whether in the factories, one of their common concerns that has been raised is the experiencing sexual harassment, no? And sometimes these policies are not in place. And I think this is something that has to be addressed by companies, because in some data, if we look at some data in the US, it creates a lot of a negative implication into in the entire economic development of the business or profit, because it results to a lot of costs, no? Like absences. It creates a hostile environment and therefore lead to some losses also in the companies. And I think this is something that has to be addressed by companies, especially by multinational companies and even small companies. And therefore, I will go to my third point. If violence continues to happen or discrimination continues to happen to women migrant workers, there is also a need to include social protection, no? And access to justice. So I think this is one of the common problem, whether even before COVID or during COVID, the lack of social protection of women migrant workers, especially domestic workers, no? Those working inside the home, and how they would be able to access justice given that most of the perpetrator are their own employers or those inside their workplace. So how do you address that? And I think one thing that must be addressed is also to come up with an effective referral pathways to also address the other essential services of women like health, psychosocial, legal, and other services. One particular aspect that has to be also, I think, addressed or is a common problem that has been raised by most women migrant workers is the lack of digital access. You know? And I think digital access is also equated to accessing justice, because if they don't have their cell phones or if they are being prohibited to use cell phones or to use, let's say, telephone, it also affects their right to access justice. No, some women migrant workers actually are problematizing that. No, if they're not allowed to use cell phones during in their workplace. And lastly, my last point is there's no concrete programs to address the overall well-being of women migrant workers. I think my main concern is that when we speak of economic development or inclusion, we mainly focused on data, GDP, GNP. I think we have to go beyond that. I think we also have to look how women are contributing and how do we address the overall well-being of women migrant workers? How do we make the women migrant workers also realize their self-worth, their dignity, and that they can have a career plan that they can eventually plan that they cannot be forever domestic workers, or they cannot be forever Filipino overseas. No, we also have to address the on-site emotional support system. No, because I think that's one of the common challenges experienced by most migrant workers. And lastly, one of the main reasons why they leave the country of origin is because of money. So I think that's one thing that also has to be addressed, the financial plan, particularly when they go back to their own country. So it appears that gender inclusion is very important, especially when we speak of women migrant workers. And yet these challenges experienced by women migrant workers are always are not prioritized or seen as not important by our government. I think this is something that we have to discuss now. Thank you very much.
Jilan, thank you very much, and to the point, and I'm very appreciative that you kept to the time. Indeed, the inclusion of gender in the supply chain is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do. As you rightly said, women migrants are boosting the economies not only of the destination countries, but also their origin countries. But for us to do that, we need to continue supporting inclusive economic growth. We need to ensure substantive equality, and we need to tackle head-on the specific and differentiated challenges that women migrants are facing in their own work and communities and environment. Thank you very much, Jilan, for that. I turn now to Dana for my second question, but allow me to introduce her to all of us. Dana, despite that she doesn't show it, she has over 20 years of experience in humanitarian aid, development programming, program management, and multidisciplinary team management in coordination with government agencies, the United Nations, and national and international organizations. She's currently my colleague, the Chief of Mission of the International Organization for Migration in Thailand. Sadly, we will be losing her soon because she will be moving into other mission. But for the time being, I do thank you for having the time to be with us today, Dana. Dana, the emerged pandemic has revealed and further increased inequalities that women migrant workers have experienced. If you would share with us the current situation of migrant workers in the region, and how has COVID-19 increased risks for migrant workers, especially for women? Dana, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Mohammed, for that introduction. It is such an honor to be here. And thanks to all of the participants who are listening and watching at the moment. And it's a pleasure to be representing the IOM Thailand office today. So if we can go on to the next slide, I'm going to be talking a bit about the challenges and emerging risks as they're linked to COVID-19. But I'd like to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about the situation of women migrants even before they start their migration journey. When we look at migrant workers, particularly from the neighboring countries of Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, PDR, and Myanmar, these are key drivers of the Thai economy. But gender inequality exists even before these migrants make the decision to migrate. So what we're looking at is that women migrants have fewer opportunities to generate income in their countries of origin and are more likely to migrate out of necessity than out of opportunity. Also, these same women migrants tend to experience discrimination prior to migration and during the recruitment process. And one example of this, and Jilan referred to domestic work as a common employer of migrant women. And oftentimes women, because of these gender roles, are channeled into certain employment opportunities in Thailand. And these employment opportunities, unfortunately, are also the ones that tend to provide less income, less salary, less money. So they start out having less money to spend on covering the costs of their regular migration and these debts that they might incur. An IOM-ILO study in the region found that in addition, there's the challenge of not having very much information prior to when they migrate. For the migrants in Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam, they received very little information, and it was notably lower for women. We see there 14% versus 20% for men. They also frequently turn to irregular migration due to these costs that they are experiencing. And this then increases their risk to exploitation, to trafficking, and exclusion from labor laws and social protection. And then once they're in Thailand as migrants, this gender inequality continues. And I want to focus on two areas. One is social protection, and the other is in the gender pay gap. The informal employment and irregular migration have a strong correlation to low or no social protection coverage. So only 1 in every 4 women surveyed by the IOM-ILO study were enrolled in social protection, compared to 1 in every 3 men. So already low in general for both genders, but especially for women. And so workers from many sectors in which women migrants are highly represented, particularly we saw in Jalen's slide, agriculture and domestic work, they are not even eligible to enroll in the Thai Social Security Fund. They can enroll in the Migrant Health Insurance Scheme, which is great in Thailand, but this only covers healthcare. And then as I mentioned, we see the gender pay gap. Migrant workers had low wages across the board. And in this study, we saw that well under half are receiving at least minimum wage. So there's also this 14% gap in income for women migrant workers, and it has significant implications on their economic resilience. And this is even in normal times, not even considering during a pandemic. So that gives you a bit of an idea of what's happening in non-pandemic times. If we go to the next slide, we're looking at resilience and savings. And this is really surprising, because when we measured migrant savings during normal times, we found that over half returned home with the same or fewer savings, which is really counterintuitive. They go to migrate so that they are earning more so that they can send at home remittances. But our studies found that this just isn't necessarily the case. So with women earning lower wages and more likely to have limited or no social protection, they are more vulnerable to economic shock, meaning that they are not able to meet sometimes even their basic needs. If they lose employment, like we're seeing so much now in Thailand, the region, and the globe, or they have a reduced income. And this is because they don't have the savings to back them up. So this raises critical concerns for women migrant workers in Thailand when we talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. So to summarize, these lower wages make it harder to pay for the migration costs, to cover their debts, and to cover their daily expenses. And while these are challenges for all migrants during all times, these factors are even more so for women, and because these women are likely to have less savings than men. If we go to the next slide, this is some information on a study that a rapid assessment that IOM Thailand conducted in Thailand in April. And so while the situation is still unfolding, as we know, we are seeing concerns already when it comes to the situation as it relates to COVID-19. So one of the biggest issues facing the non-Thais in Thailand, so mostly migrants, is that they have insufficient income. That's the single biggest issue that they reported to IOM. 2/3 of respondents indicated that at least some of the migrants in their communities wish to leave Thailand, but were not able to. So this also creates a problem where they're stuck in Thailand, have no income, they're away from family, they're not able to send remittances. And then sectors in which women migrant workers are employed, we've already mentioned those, in large number are among the hardest hit. So you've got all of these factors combining to set the stage for a pretty difficult and challenging situation. Next slide. And so here we see it spelled out on this chart. The issues that I've outlined today all existed before the COVID-19 pandemic. The higher levels of informal employment and irregular migrant, combined with the lower salaries and savings, place women migrant workers at increased risk during the pandemic. There's no doubt about this. As we start to shift our perspective towards economic recovery, as things are looking a little bit better, the numbers are staying low, we need to acknowledge and understand and proactively address the long-term implications for individual migrants and their families, especially women. They're at very high risk to be trapped in this cycle of debt, poverty, and exploitation for all of the reasons that I've mentioned. And with limited opportunities for employment at home in their home countries, or remigration and reemployment in Thailand as the economy is struggling and many businesses and companies remain closed, there's currently very little end in sight for those migrants who are currently in distress. I'd like to shift to a little more positive points. So if you can do the next slide. And this is on the Promise program. So this is, IOM Thailand is partnering with UN Women on Promise, and this is funded by the Swiss. And this program focuses on safe, orderly, and fair migration as a pathway to poverty reduction in Thailand and in Cambodia, Laos, PDR, and Myanmar. So we're achieving this through 3 areas. One is improved protections for migrants, and that includes providing information on what their rights are, working with the employers so that they know what the migrants' rights are, and working in migrant resource centers to have this information available to migrants who are thinking, or individuals thinking of migrating. The second one is skills development. We work with businesses and skills providers and the migrants themselves to help them develop their skills. And then we increase their employability by job matching. So developing in skills in areas where we know that there will be a demand in Thailand. So I think this is an example of good practice where we're working towards better protection, increased skills, and greater employability for migrants. It's not just the right thing to do, it's good business. And IOM is very pleased that 2 of our business partners will be speaking about this after I am today, about the importance of these approaches for migrants and especially women. And with my last slide here, so what does the future look for women and migrant workers? If we can switch to the next slide. Thanks. So as I've mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic has posed a range of significant challenges for all of us. But what the pandemic has really highlighted is the importance of continuing the commitments to safe migration, ethical recruitment, and decent employment for all migrant workers. And so programs like Promise are not just a protective strategy for the most vulnerable, but actually an essential component for our efforts to ensure economic resilience and recovery for individuals and nations alike, if we consider remittances and countries of origin. And so how can we achieve this? Well, there are some very key and important action points. One is reducing the costs, the length, and the complexity of regular migration channels. Another is increasing the capacity of employers and recruiters on ethical recruitment and employment. What does it mean to be an ethical recruiter and not forcing migrants to incur all these debts before they even come to Thailand? Provide clear information and rights-based, gender-responsive, migrant-centered services throughout all stages of the migration cycle. And this includes health screening, quarantine when we're looking at migrants coming back, pre-departure and post-arrival information, and information on preventative measures during their travel. And so how do they prevent contacting or spreading COVID-19? Another important action point is ensuring migrants are protected and economically resilient. And this is through such things as health insurance, sick leave, decent wages, skills development and job matching, and access to jobs, services, social protection, and a safe, non-discriminatory environment during their return and their reintegration back into their home countries. So as both Mohammed and Jalen mentioned, this is both the right thing and the smart thing to do for all of the people who are involved in this migration process, not just the migrants, but also their employers, the government, and those that are facilitating this migration process. So on the last slide, you can see contact information. If you want more information on the statistics, the reports and the assessments that I have referenced throughout my presentation, you can go to the IOM Thailand website that's there. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dana, and you're making my job very easy today because you're all sticking to time. But unfortunately, as you rightly said, Dana, gender inequality is one of the main drivers for many of the women migrants to leave their countries of origin. It's a push factor. Unfortunately, only to find that these inequalities continue to haunt them and hunt them down in the countries of destination. I'm grateful that you did refer to the Promise program, because definitely such a complex issue does require comprehensive solutions, not siloed, simplistic activities on the ground. We wanted to dedicate a bit of time to question and answers, but for the time being, we only have one question from Stanley about the situation of women migrant workers in the garment sector. So if you may bear with us, Stanley, to the end of the session, maybe we will have a more comprehensive opportunity for the speakers to come in. So we will now, given that we've already heard from you, Dana, and Ghislaine, we do recognize that the business sector can play a key and a huge role in promoting women's empowerment. So let us hear from the business partners today of their experiences, as they have done some good work there in supporting especially women migrants to realize their potential to development. I turn to Kun Nachapatakorn Chotsiri for her reflections and experience. Kun Chotsiri is the president of Pacharion Interco Limited, which produces automotive rubber parts. Also, she serves as a senior specialist of the House of Representatives and as an advisor to the chair of Labor Subcommittee of the Parliament. If you may share with us, Kun Chotsiri, your experience, the floor is yours.
ค่ะสวัสดีค่ะขอบคุณมากนะคะ
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here.
โอเคค่ะในส่วนของการนำเข้า MOU ที่มีการคัดเลือกแรงงานเข้ามาทำงานในประเทศไทยในส่วนของการใช้แรงงานที่บริษัทหรือโรงงานของดิฉันนะคะก็มีความเท่าเทียมกันในการคัดเลือกทั้งหญิงและชายให้ความเสมอภาคโดยเท่าเทียมกันค่ะ
So in my role, I oversee the MOU between Thailand and other neighboring countries. When it comes to recruitment, we consider the gender equality for all men and women workers.
ในการทำงานนั้นเราก็จะให้อธิบายลักษณะงานให้ทั้งหญิงและชายเข้าใจถึงหน้างานว่าการทำงานนั้นเป็นอย่างไรเพื่อให้เขามีสิทธิ์ในการรับรู้และเลือกงานตามความเหมาะสมหรือความชอบของเขาค่ะ
So after recruitment, we also have an orientation to prepare all workers so for them to be informed what kind of work, what are the conditions of work that they will do, so they can make decisions for themselves.
ค่ะเมื่อเขาได้เข้ามาทำงานอยู่ในโรงงานของเราเราก็ได้ดูแลคนงานทั้งหญิงและชายอย่างเสมอภาคให้ค่าแรงขั้นต่ำและมีสวัสดิการมากกว่าค่าแรงขั้นต่ำและให้ดูแลในเรื่องของที่พักที่อยู่อย่างปลอดภัยและการทำงานก็แบ่งหน้าที่การทำงานโดยถ้างานอาจจะมีลักษณะที่เหมาะสมกับเพศตรงข้ามของผู้หญิงก็ให้ผู้หญิงนั้นได้เลือกก่อนว่าเขาอยากจะได้ทำงานในแผนกที่เขาเหมาะสมกับตัวเขาในเพศเขาค่ะ
So in terms of job allocation, we actually and also like the way we treat our workers, both men and women, we treat them equally in terms of like the equal pay, and also we also provide accommodation as well. And specifically, we consider the gender sensitivity. So we prioritize that women migrant workers would have the chance to choose or to look at the job that fit their skills.
หรือแม้กระทั่งนะคะเมื่อตรวจพบว่าพอเขาทำงานไประยะหนึ่งเขามีภาวะตั้งครรภ์บางโรงงานอาจจะต้องให้เขาออกจากงานแต่ทางบริษัทเราดูแลเขาให้ถูกต้องตามกฎหมายแล้วก็ให้สวัสดิการในการที่พาเขาไปตรวจตั้งครรภ์ให้ครรภ์ให้อยู่ครบสมบูรณ์แล้วก็มีการให้ของขวัญเมื่อเขาคลอดบุตรด้วยค่ะดูแลสุขภาพสตรีอย่างดี
for women migrant workers, we also look into the well-being or the welfare of our workers as well when they need specific women-specific needs. For example, a maternity care. We also make sure that they have access to social protection, and when they after they give birth, we also provide additional assistance in order to accommodate their new condition in life.
โอเคในส่วนของทางท่านมีอะไรจะสอบถามทางดิฉันอีกเพิ่มเติมไหมคะ
So I would like to share, this is what I would like to share for now, and please, if you have any question, I'm ready to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kunna Chapatakan. You've stated some very practical and good policies and provisions in place in your business, including the rotation policy that allows migrant workers or workers in general be better informed when they take decisions on what type of a job they would like to work on. You've mentioned the equal pay between men and women workers, which is very much commended given the global tendency for having yet until today a wage gap between men and women. You've stated the accommodation that you provide for migrant
Hello.
Dear, all we have some issues with internet connection here. We're trying to reconnect Mohammed. Please stay with us. But I think there's nothing that holds us back actually if you continue speaking Nansiri. Siriman, can you hear us?
Yes, yes, I hear you.
Please continue. We are with Mohammed in one room. We don't know why he got connected. So we have you on loudspeaker here. Continue speaking and Mohammed will be connected in 1 second.
Okay, because Mohammed have no chance to introduce myself. Actually, I have two hats as Secretary General of Asian Confederation of Employer and Employer Confederation of Thailand. We have been working and engaging actively in the area of labor migration in ASEAN. A lot of information to share, but now I'm realized that I allocating only 5 minutes. So many things that I want to say have been presented already. To utilize the time, I have only three slides to present. You can go to my slide very quick while I'm sum up what I want to highlight. So please go to next slide. Okay, many reports show that migrant workers, especially women migrant workers, have no opportunity for training. They start their work as low-skilled workers, as employer organization, we believe that low skill doesn't mean no potential. In our member workplace, we promote all opportunity equally, including training and development. Few members of ECOT send women migrant workers to attend Department of Skill Development public training course. Anyhow, in-house training course is more friendly to them. The course is mostly on soft skills like supervisor, teamwork, and team leader, communication, and problem solving. We work with ILO and IOM on this area as well. This soft skill considered very necessary to increase productivity and company competitiveness. This is also lead to their career advancement. Anyhow, we realize that migrant workers cannot take up the technical certified training course due to in Thailand, they have the right to take the exam, but the examination is all in Thai, so they cannot recognize any skill they have. So next slide, please. Can you hear me? Can you turn to next slide? Hello? Hello? No, okay. Okay. Skill recognition. The MOU between Thai and CLMV country doesn't allow Thai employer to hire skilled worker. Even some may have specific skill, but due to lack of mutual recognition, the skill cannot be recognized. They cannot get better paid job. And from business perspective, it is beneficial to have skill recognition and skill development for migrant worker, regardless the man or woman. Employer play a crucial role in recognizing the prior skill and providing equal training opportunity and career advancement. But a lot of EO perceive migrant workers as temporary due to work permit and visa limitation that they have to go back after a certain time. So it's not worth to invest on their skill development. But we have to advocate what it's not depend on the quantity of time, but it's the quality of time they work with you. Some may have specific skill, but take up low skill job. Something that we experience today is like underutilization of skill. Next, please. So I will talk about role of employer organization on migrant workers. A keyword is commitment and support. We have three measures to do is awareness, make them aware, awareness raising, advocating, and then let them see the benefit. We will support and advocate our members in every possible way. Misconduct sometimes comes from lack of awareness, lack of knowledge of laws and regulation, misleading or inaccurate information, weak government and lack of enforcement, especially supply chain challenges, subcontracting down to informality. So we realize that business has important role in ensuring diversity, inclusion, protecting migrant workers, not only responsible practices, but a good business strategy for enhancing reputation and brand image. The IO report show gender diversity help improve business outcome. Enterprises with equal employment opportunity policy and gender inclusive culture are more likely to have improved profits and productivity and experience enhanced reputation, attracting and retain talent worker. And what is the things that we try to work with our member, and our role is so we try to partner with too many organizations and advocate our member all the time. I think my time is finished. Is that?
You still have some time, Khonsiriwan, if you would like to continue.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. But since I'm will left after this, if there is any question, I can get a question now. If there are any question from the floor.
Excellent, and we do thank you, and we do apologize to those who are with us in the room about the technical hiccup. It's just a case in point about the digital gap. So I left my home this morning to come to the UN SCAP to have a better UN internet connectivity. And ironically, myself and my colleague Amy, who's managing the presentations, are in the same room in the UN where we have a subpar internet connectivity. So just a case in point. I will, before we go into our thinking out loud together on the COVID impact, I would like to have a second poll with all the participants. And my question is, how did your businesses or organizations or companies or government offices consider the impacts of COVID on women migrant workers? And you will see the poll now. Not at all, to little extent, to some extent, a moderate extent, a large extent. So we have around 50% of the participants responding, slightly less than the first poll. Around 26% of the participants said to a large extent, and some 11% said not at all. And then there is a variation between the two extremes. Considering the time of the crisis of COVID, we have been seeing different adjustments of the businesses to continue for some and for some to recover. In this extraordinary times, it offers us an opportunity to integrate women migrant workers as right holders who are essential to the region's sustainable development. So you've heard the Secretary General of the UN saying, and many other global leaders saying, let us build back better. And this maybe is an opportunity for us to integrate better women migrant workers into the business when we come to recover. Having said that, let us explore what business employers can do to enhance the protection of women migrant workers. I would like to invite you all, as all panelists, to share maybe initiatives, ideas, thoughts, reflections for business sectors to promote inclusive and gender-sensitive response, including ensuring women migrant workers have access to employment, income, and social protection and essential services during and after the times of crisis. Maybe we can start with you, Kun Nachatapakorn.
ค่ะโอเคค่ะสำหรับในวิกฤตโควิดนะคะในส่วนของการที่ผลิตภัณฑ์ได้ลดลงในเรื่องของการผลิตเราถูกเลิกจ้างแรงงานบางส่วนในการเลิกจ้างนั้นเราก็ได้แชร์ไปทางฝ่ายผลิตว่าขอให้แบ่งทั้งเพศหญิงและเพศชายอย่างเท่าเทียมกันแล้วก็ให้ด้วยความสมัครใจมีค่าชดเชยตอบแทนให้อย่างถูกต้องตามกฎหมายและเมื่อน้องเขายินยอมที่จะออกงานโดยการเลิกจ้างของเราก็แนะนำงานที่ใหม่ให้ตรงกับความรู้ความสามารถและทักษะของเขาซึ่งก็เป็นอะไรที่เป็นไปตามกฎหมายและงานกำหนดและทุกคนก็แฮปปี้
So in my experience, because of this ongoing pandemic that forced our business to reduce the production of our factory, which obviously has affected the employment of our workers. So the way we do, we make sure that everyone receive a fair share of compensation and they have access to social protection, making sure that all men and women workers receive the same benefit. That is what we did try doing.
Thank you very much. And I promise that next time we meet, I will moderate the session in Thai language.
Thank you.
But
thank you very much for your consideration.
I understood that. But maybe we move to you, Dana, for some reflections from the international organizations, the UN side.
Sure, thanks, Mohammed. And I think I'm actually going to stay in Thailand just so I can hear you moderate the next time all in Thai. I want to be here to hear that. No, I'll join from Mexico. So one thing we've learned in the COVID pandemic is that no one is safe until everyone is safe. And migrants sometimes avoid treatment because they are uncertain about their rights, or there might be mistrust that they will be deported or they will be apprehended and detained. And so Thailand does have a good practice in that it provides treatments, medical treatments, regardless of nationality. And so that's extremely important. Every country should be doing that. The migration status needs to be treated completely separately from the services that are being provided, so that there isn't any fear that if I go and seek treatment, it might end up the next day or the next week or whatever, that I'm then apprehended because I'm undocumented. And already the panelists mentioned inclusion and social protection. So that's health care, workers' compensation, sick leave, parental leave. These are all really important, and that increases the resilience, as does a living wage. All very important points, some of which I brought up in my presentation. And then, of course, that aspiration of workplaces that are free of gender-based discrimination. So these are all really important points, I think, that we can work towards, so that our employers especially can work towards to increase this protection.
Thank you so much, Dana, and thank you also for referring to the best practice here in Thailand, which is providing medical treatment for all, which, as we all know, is not necessarily the case in many other countries. Jelen, if you may, from a civil society activist perspective, where would you like us to go from here?
Thank you, Mohammed, for that emphasis on the activist. And my point would be that it's impossible, especially for business sectors, employers, government, to look at migration as a development issue if violence against women remains unaddressed and always sideline. So I think there's a need for us, for businesses, employers, government. Number one, recommendations, maybe there's a need to support an access to social protection and essential services, especially for women migrant workers. One of the things that we're doing right now as part of the Safe and Fair project with ILO and UN Women is we are trying to improve the referral pathways where women migrant workers and their families can try to access justice if in case there are violations. And I think that's number one, to ensure that if they decide to migrate, they are safe. Second is I would like to put emphasis on addressing sexual violence or any forms of violence in the workplace, because employers and businesses needs to include budget and policies or laws, protocols that will govern and address the issue of sexual violence inside the workplace. As I've said earlier, in one research done in the US, it's more expensive if it's more costly to address. It's more costly. Not addressing violence against women is more costly than getting into war. And I think that says a lot of point. And I'm not comparing which is more challenging or more devastating, but what we're trying to say that women's issues, violence against women are important issue. And then my third point is create an environment in the workplace that will ensure safe space. So how do we do that? Awareness raising can be provided by employers. They can conduct basic orientations that focus on rights. They can maintain active chat groups, which being done by recruitment agencies in the Philippines. They have a chat groups where women migrant workers can ask questions if they think there are violations committed, or maintain a page, a social media page where women migrant workers can ask questions on their rights. During COVID, one of the problems that has been raised by women migrant workers that we interviewed is that some government pages are not working and they don't receive response. So we hope that in this kind of pandemic, they were actually even requesting just to acknowledge that they received the email. Just acknowledge, they said, just acknowledge that they got the email, they got the text, but there is no acknowledgement. And then maybe another point of ensuring safe space, schedule regular checkups, visits for issues on sexual and reproductive health rights. Because especially for domestic workers, they can only go during weekend, and sometimes hospitals are closed. No? So I think these some points are basic information, basic steps that can be done by employers. And then third point, provide working numbers. No? Because usually they're being given working numbers, but they are not working. So maybe it's also the responsibility of recruitment agencies, businesses, employers to make sure that when they hand this paper, it's working, and that someone will answer at the end of the call. No? And then lastly, employers must also help women migrant workers to think of their career plans, their jobs, that after being a domestic worker, what can they do? So I think it was emphasized earlier that there's a need for reskilling, to add more skills. I think that's something that also has to be addressed by the employers and businesses. Because at the end of the day, the reason why they left the country is because they wanted to earn more. But of course, most of the time, the problem is the salaries are not enough, and unfortunately, some of them become victims of violence against women. And I think if you look at the effective, if we compare the cost, we would assume that the problem now is they went out and then they experienced violence. So that's another problem, and I think that's something that has to be addressed continuously in this discourse of migration and development. Thank you very much.
Jelen, thank you so much. And I believe between you and Dana, I can summarize that one, I think access to justice is of prime importance. And we need to make sure that women migrant workers have due access to justice. It is very important to continue focusing on the shadow pandemic, which is the violence against women. Regardless of the context and the space, whether it was domestic violence in the private sphere or work-related or in the public domain. And the point that you brought, Dana, which is delinking the migratory status from the access to basic services, especially medical services. Due to how amazing you were all with time, we have slightly more time to answer questions and answer questions from the participants. So maybe we can go to you, Dana, for Stanley's question. On the situation of migrant workers in the garment industry, and then probably the second question will be for Jelen. But to you, Dana.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you, Stanley, for the question. And under the COVID context, IOM is working in the manufacturing industry. We know that manufacturing employs many women, and this is where the garment industry would fall under that. And we are seeing reduced income due to the lost work orders. So this definitely is a concern. It's also a concern not only in Thailand, but in neighboring countries where this is actually a main sector of employment, looking at Cambodia and Myanmar, where there's a lot of internal migration, especially for women who are going to work in the garment sector. And yes, there has been major job losses. So that just gives a quick overview on the situation of female migrant workers in the garment industry.
Thank you, Dana. I was multitasking, answering to private chat and trying to refer the second question to Jilen. Jilen, our colleague Bissam from UNDP Nepal Accelerator Lab was asking for returnee migrants, and he gave a hypothetical example. What about a woman migrant from the Philippines working in Malaysia, and then now she comes back to the Philippines and she's temporarily out of a job, doesn't have any income generation? What are the types of reintegrating a returnee, a woman migrant in our countries of origin? And in which sectors? Is it easier to integrate her back in the hospitality sector or agriculture, etc.? So it's a question maybe if you have the opportunity to reflect on, Jilen.
Actually, that's one of the greatest challenge now, no, with the pandemic. There are a lot of overseas Filipino workers, no. And one of the main drivers of the economy of the Philippines are remittances, basically. And now, given that, basically the problem now is the program of the government is if you're a returning OFWs, they are encouraged to go back to the province. No, we call it balik probinsya. It's like going back to the province. And currently, right now, there is no clear policy yet in terms of how the reintegration will happen in the province given the pandemic. So the one community that we are actually working in Visayas, in the central part of the Philippines, before COVID, they're actually doing some livelihood programs on soap making, organic soap makings and other related products. And now, given the challenge, I'm not sure, and of course it would lead to an increased poverty. I'm not sure if that soaps would be enough to sustain now their work, no. But I'm just saying a particular area, no, in the Philippines. As of now, there is no clear guidelines in terms of how they will be integrated in the provinces. Which economy will they contribute into? They said that it would be mainly on contract tracing, no. Not the women migrant workers, but in general. So to contribute in contract tracing of COVID-19 patients. But then again, the question is, are our migrant workers have that kind of skills? Would be able to really respond to the need of the economy now? So I think that's another challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have more questions coming. We only have 3 minutes, so I will probably be able to share with the floor one more question, and then we will move to the closing part. So a question to all, maybe Dana, think about it, given that you've been working a lot with the destination and origin countries, but also Kun Siriwan and Kun Nachapatakorn. What is the duty of destination countries for migrant workers during COVID? I know it is an extensive kind of set of provisions. So whatever you can go over, and then we will be happy to share further details, maybe in writing later on after the session. Who would like to take that question from the panel? So maybe allow me to as a moderator, to reflect a bit on the question and to attempt to answer it, but it will by no means be a comprehensive answer. But the duty is, I think we need to separate between what is happening in reality and what is happening on the ground, and the theoretical duty from a rights perspective. So from the rights perspective, we need to ensure the full protection of the migrant workers, the access to services, the access to opportunities, and the non-discrimination. So the principle of non-discrimination when it comes to accessing the basic services and accessing the opportunities in the destination country. Again, we will be happy to provide more, an attempt to more comprehensive answers to the questions that we have in the question and answer session. I have Dana raising her hands. If you would like to come in, Dana.
Yes, thanks, Mohammed. I didn't jump into your question because I actually was reading with quite a bit of interest the ethical recruitment question that an attendee posted. And so now I see the question, the duty of destination country of migrant workers during COVID-19 pandemic. And I think when we were talking about what employers can do, in my response in terms of protection, I already mentioned quite a bit of this, and then you reflected on it as well. And that is, I mean, if I could sum it up in one sentence, that is social protection that covers migrant workers in the country as well as the nationals in the country. And for some countries, that's a big ask because they don't even have the social protection schemes to cover the nationals in their country, let alone the migrant workers. But when we look at the way that migrant workers here in Thailand are driving the economy, it's very important, also considering their increased vulnerability for all of the reasons that we've been presenting and discussing here, to make sure that they have access to the social protection. And so it's not just the access to testing and treatment, if we're talking specifically about COVID, but all of the social protection measures that should another pandemic or a second wave happen, they have these structures in place that will prevent them from falling into deeper challenges and suffering than they would normally. And I mentioned, of course, the healthcare, but also the workers' compensation, sick leave, parental leave, some of these basic structures in place, probably the most important being the living wage that I mentioned. So I think there's a lot that we've discussed that can be implemented, but of course we also have to recognize in countries where there are many economic challenges due to the pandemic, what can they prioritize and where can they invest the very few resources that they have. We just have to recognize that that's a problem.
Thank you so much, Dana. And unfortunately, we do have more questions coming in, which on one hand shows how important this topic for all those who have joined us today. We only have 20 minutes to go. And I would like to go to the last part of our panel today, which is to go back to you, panelists, and hear from you final reflections, key messages that you would like to keep with the participants or the audience today, and maybe we start with the reverse order. So maybe we go to you, Kun Sirwan, for some reflections and thoughts. Kun Sirwan, you are still muted. Maybe we go to again to Kon Nachatapatakorn, and then we go back to Kon Sirwan.
Hello, again, please. Again, please. Hello,
We can hear you.
อ้าวทำไมไม่ได้ยินอ่ะก็นี่เปิดเสียงแล้ว
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello.
ขอทราบคำถามอีกทีได้ไหม
Again, please. Again, please. Listen. Hello, hello. Yeah, come and
Kunna and Siri, did you hear the intervention of Kunna Chatapakorn?
No, I cannot hear anything.
That's fine. Then maybe we can move back to you, Dana, and then Jilen. And if our Thai friends are still online, we will go back to them. Dana?
Okay, thanks, Mohammed. I think we need to recognize that migrants in general tend to be quite invisible in society, and that is especially true for women, and it's especially true for undocumented women migrants. And so it's very easy, especially because this pandemic is affecting everyone in many negative ways. It's easy for us to focus on the issues that are most in our face, that are most concerning, and there's a lot of fear when it comes to the pandemic and the fact that this is something that we are all trying to avoid, and that it's affecting us all economically and emotionally, etc. And so when they are not visible and they're not able to advocate for their rights, it's easy to forget them. And so also, considering that the symposium is really focusing on businesses and human rights, I think that a lot of what we've discussed is not necessarily the responsibility of the government, but really the responsibility of the businesses as well, if not to implement themselves, but to advocate with the government, because that is the whole idea behind business and human rights. And I am very pleased to see that increasingly, even if we look over the past decade, a decade ago, ethical recruitment wasn't even really a topic. It wasn't something that was discussed. Business and human rights wasn't really a hot topic, and now it really is. And so I think it's very encouraging that businesses are becoming so involved. And I just want to remind them that they do have the duty for care and protection of their workers, their employers, or sorry, their employees, whether they are nationals of their country or they are visitors who are here trying to improve the economy. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dana. And I can see now that Kunsiriwan has reconnected. Kunsiriwan, we're asking for final reflections or key messages that you would like to leave with us today. If you may unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Now we can hear
you
you
hear
loud.
me? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, what I would like to say, you didn't introduce myself because it's technical problem. I have two hats as a Secretary General of Asian Confederation of Employers. So our confederation acknowledge that migrant workers play a very important role in contributing to economic growth in many Asian countries across sectors. We believe that effective and efficient labor mobility is important in ensuring that business in ASEAN have adequate human resources, equipped with right skill, recognize the positive correlation between promoting diversity and inclusion among workforce and innovation business competitiveness. That is what I want to say. Okay.
Thank you so much, Kunsiriwan. Last but not least, Jilen.
Thank you again, Mohammed. So I think I'll start with what Kunsiriwan mentioned, that the importance of migrant workers into the economy. And I think given the context of the pandemic, we cannot go business as usual. There's a need for a shift of framework and perspective in terms of having policies that having gender neutral policies are no longer acceptable. We need to consider the different contexts and experiences of migrant workers, including women and marginalized poor women. And therefore, there's a need to address that vulnerability. So whether with COVID or without COVID, there's a need to address access to justice. We need to protect our women migrant workers. We need to ensure that they don't experience further violations, that they don't experience violence against women, that they are safe in their offices, that they are safe inside the home, whether they are domestic worker. And as I've said, it's unacceptable that we remain silent, especially on issues of violence against women, especially among women migrant workers. And I think I'll end to that, and then thank you again very much for inviting us.
Salamat Dinang. But I can see also now that Kun Nachatapakorn has come back online. Allow me to repeat my request, which is basically if you may share with us your final reflections or key messages.
Okay ค่ะ thank you so much ค่ะในส่วนของดิฉันก็ขอบพระคุณ IOM สำหรับโครงการดีๆที่มีให้กับโครงการที่เพื่อพัฒนาศักยภาพของสตรีนะคะของแรงงานต่างชาติแล้วก็ให้สิทธิเสรีภาพในเรื่องของสตรีทางบริษัทเราก็ทางโรงงานของเราก็มีความยินดีที่จะร่วมโครงการทุกๆเรื่องในส่วนที่เพื่อพัฒนาศักยภาพของแรงงานต่างชาติ
So I would like to thank you all, and also especially IOM and also UN Women for the chance for us to partner in this special project. We are glad to be a part of the project that help enhancing the rights of women workers. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, dear panelists, and thanks to all those who have dedicated 1.5 hours of their day to listen to what we have to say today. As everyone said, including Kun Sirwan in her final remarks, ensuring inclusive growth, gender inclusion in recruitment and skill development is not only the right thing to do, it is smart business. It is good business, as you said, Dana. The good practices so far to support women migrant workers to realize their full potential should be the duty not only of the countries of destination, not only the countries of origin, where they need to better inform the migrant workers of the rights, their obligations, and what to expect when they land into the countries of destination. But also there is a huge and a growing room for the businesses themselves, for the employers, to look into employment, retention, skilling, and opportunities from a rights perspective. And that is not only to the benefit of the workers, especially migrant workers, especially women migrant workers, but it's also good for business. I would like, before I close, to give a shout not only to women migrant workers, but to the full spectrum of gender diversity. And we need to acknowledge that all genders do go through a lot of challenges in the countries where they are working, and we need to continue to be aware of that and address the challenges that all genders go through when they embark on migrating for work. We do stop here. Thank you again, all of you, and thanks to those who have supported us to be online today. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. Bye-bye.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
ขอบคุณค่ะ